Hey man,
Hey Eric, how's it going?
I'm good. Sorry for the cap. We're still in lockdown.
Oh, for the what? The cap?
Cap.
Okay, yeah, no worries.
How are you doing?
Oh, I'm good. Yeah, I'm just enjoying this. It's about to rain here, which I always enjoy the weather, just sitting outside before it rains, so it's perfect timing.
Good. First of all, Joe, can you introduce yourself, like for these talent coaches?
Sure. Yeah, so my name is Joel Smith. I'm the owner of Just Fly Sports Performance, which is an online educational resource for coaches. I've been a strength coach and or track coach for the better part of about 15 years now. I was a track and field competitor in college and did track and basketball in high school as on the varsity level. So, and been interested in training pretty much my whole life. So that's probably a short recap of where I've been.
Okay, I've been a big fan of yours. Like I listen like half of your podcasts.
That's awesome. It's been a lot of content. So you've spent a good portion of your life listening to it. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So the first question would be, I kind of want to ask, why would you start doing the podcast?
Sure. So I think, once the pandemic hit, like, I think it was really people kind of, a lot of people had nothing to do, or were at home. So that's when it's just like, oh, I'll start a podcast. I started mine 5 years ago, and I think I just did it. There's no real good reason. I just saw that some other coaches were doing it. I felt like having conversations from a growth perspective, I felt like I was always a lot of a writer was my main medium. And in some ways, I think it still is the main way I communicate. But I wanted to expand my own knowledge, not just by reading, but by having conversation. I think the actual interface with another human being is, oh, sorry, bumblebee
It's
landed
okay.
at me. Okay, we're good. Having interface with another human being offers elements that I think you can't get with just reading. And for me, it's easy to kind of for me, I've been someone who's been very wrapped up in my own process for so long. I've been training myself since I was basically like 10, and so it's like when you're very wrapped up in yourself, it's very important to continue to grow. The only way to do it is just to have repeat conversations with other people. And I've always been an open mind and curious type person. So I just felt from my own perspective, it was important to for me to grow. And I think, fortunately, I think that's been a good way for a lot of other people to find growth as well.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna jump into the next one. I want to ask, how will you program like in-season training and off-season training for basketball teams?
Sure. That was actually one of my first strength coaching jobs, was doing the training for a basketball team when I was at Wilmington College in Ohio. So that was in graduate school, I worked with track and field for 2 years there, doing their strength programs and everything for the athletes I worked with, jumpers and a decathlete, and not a lot of athletes. But when I got to Wilmington, it was as a track coach, assistant cross country, and then kind of the school's strength coach, quote unquote. It'd be just more in the sense there wasn't official guidelines. It was more the coaches that wanted to use me. And the basketball team was my first team that really wanted to leverage, I guess, what I had to offer. And at 25, I was really shooting from the hip. Like, I knew how to get people to jump higher, how to help them jump higher and hopefully run faster, and those things we associate with being good at basketball. And to that end, we did a great job. I would say the average vertical jump increase was, I would say, 3 to 6 inches or 7 to 15 centimeters in about 2-3 months. So like, we did a good job with that. And it was a weird schedule too, because the coach wanted to train 4 days and then take 3 days off. And I'm like, that's kind of tough, but we worked around it. We did a lot of like 6 sets of 3 Olympic lifts and high pulls and depth jumps and stuff like that, and squatting. It was real basic, but we got good results from that. And so in that realm of things, I mean, that was all I knew though, like that. So it's like, that's what I could bring to the table. And so athletes who needed to express more power to reach their next level of performance, I think I did a great job. What I wasn't very good at that time was, one was just being smart with like injury prevention. I had a guy dislocate his shoulder, a center dislocate his shoulder doing push jerks. And then of course the coach doesn't want to do that exercise anymore. He was like a 6'9", like farm boy, not very, and a farm boy and a not athletic. Like a lot of farm boys are actually very athletic. This guy was not, and just dislocated his shoulder. This is, I'm 25, 26, just starting out. So that was one of my first experiences in terms of, and after that, I kind of had all the players fill out like an injury history because I found out that guy had like a shoulder separation history, and we're just jumping right into behind the neck push jerks and all these like horror stories that I think that you would see or hear, you know, young coaches tell. That was one of mine, you know, just, and it was funny too, because it was a metal bar and it just dropped from 6'9" center arm just straight on the floor. And so that was a, you know, that was a learning experience for me. So, but yeah, that was my first experience and we got great outputs there. But yeah, so could you actually rephrase the question, or is there anything you wanted to know more about how I trained that group?
It's like, let's say for like in-season training, there's a lot of competition between, there's a lot, like every week there probably gonna be like 2 or 3 games. And how would you program their training?
Sure. So I mostly did the training for that group out of season. In season, I think it is really simple. It's just fill the buckets that they're not getting. So, and this is where I think the training has evolved to the point where I actually haven't been in the trenches in this stuff. So I can just speak from conversations I've had, and then just how I tend to go about in-season training with other athletes is they're going to be doing a lot of short space, change of direction. There's a lot of strain on the quads, the glutes, the calves, those types of things. So you just know what muscles are getting strained and stressed generally. And I know a lot of coaches will talk about, oh, look, we're still maxing in season. We're still lifting heavy in season. To that, I say, who cares? It doesn't matter. Like, that's basically just to validate yourself. The only thing that matters is that the players are healthy, happy, and you're filling up the buckets they're not getting. So just keeping in mind that those muscles groups are going to be a little bit more stressed. Yes, you can squat or deadlift, but I also like giving the players menus at that point. It's like, look, maybe we're going to do a little bit of lifting. Here's a day we're cleared to fill up that strength bucket. And then just giving them the choice, like saying, hey, here's menu option A, B, C. And that's like what my friend Corey Schlesinger did a lot of. I'm sure he still does it. You know, at Stanford, he was doing a lot of that. I saw his like mastermind board where the players come in. It's like, here's your menu, A, B, you know, you can do this lift, this lift, this lift. And it takes some selflessness and a lack of ego on the level of the coach to get to that point, because you realize it's not about me. It's not about my system. It's not about posting that we're going heavy in season to validate myself. It's about what gets the player to their highest level of preparedness. And you realize that, one, the lifting isn't even that big of the deal in season. And two, what's going to help them the most is what they feel best doing. So just give them a choice, you know. So that's my big thing, is find the places where it's appropriate to lift. Probably err on the side of less is more, err on the side of like the micro dose like Corey does. I think a lot of those coaches do, and err on the side of giving athletes a choice on what they'd like to do in season. So oftentimes seasoned strength coaches will tell you, I heard the analogy of like, if in the grand scheme of things, you know, you got the head sport coach, the assistant sport coaches, the players, and you basically at that point, you're kind of like, if you think of that whole machine as a car, you're like the cup holder in the car. And you're not the engine, you're not the main. You have to just look at it from where you are, and you're at that point, it's making the players feel good. And I think that, yes, keeping people injury free through appropriate loads and isometrics is a good thing. I am a big fan of isometric work, and I was part of a roundtable where a lot of like NBA and, you know, D1 strength coaches were talking about their use of isometrics in season, and that can help mitigate pain and keep people healthy. So sure, I think incorporating that too as well is good, and maybe even offering a menu system there. Hey, you can do this hold straight for a minute 30, or you can break it up into 3 by 30 seconds and add some weight, something like that. So just giving people a choice and having those options.
Yeah. So I heard it from your podcast. Sorry. So I think it's like when you're in college, And you mentioned that there's a time you were like lifting a lot and your performance was like not getting improved. And after that year, you just kind of like lift less and do more like plyometric. And you mentioned on the podcast, you said that after you like lift less and do more plyometric, your performance was like increase. Is that right?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
So,
mean, but
yeah.
it's also not. It's also situational. Like you don't want to look at it in a vacuum. There's always like the interplay of strength and speed. But yeah, for the most part, I've overlifted for sure in the past and seen that negatively impact me.
So for now, if you're gonna train like let's say field athletes, are you gonna like let them lift that much? Or like is it going to be like every day, like every week you're gonna be like clean and snatch and like squat heavy or like a lot of like quarter squat, mid thigh pull, that kind of thing?
Sure. So to me, it's yes, in a way, yes. It just depends a little bit on someone's wiring. So for me, I don't know if you've heard of the like narrow versus wide infrasternal angle, which if we zoom out and speak more generally about it, it's really just, are you a power athlete or are you an elastic? Are you more of a strength or do you use elasticity? Do you have a better squat or are you more of a deadlifter type person? And so people who are more elastic will, their cap on heavy lifting is just less. So for them, it might mean a few things, and this could be for someone like me, someone who's more elastic, has natural bounce. And I would say this would reflect a lot of basketball players. If you look at maybe basketball versus football, perhaps
Yeah,
you would have more people in this elastic camp, more narrow infrasternal angles, more people who. And so the big thing with people who are elastic and narrow is, it's not that you can't lift, you should. It's just don't do it in a way that gives you a negative shape change. Basically that alters your posture and the internal pressures to the point where you are losing the elasticity. And so that could mean if I, a narrow, do a lot of heavy squatting, I'm going to become a little bit more quad dominant, back dominant, rear foot dominant, and my posture changes, so I just don't have that pop. Someone who has a wide infrasternal angle can do more squatting. They can handle more loads without that negative change. So that's the big one. And so for someone who's a narrow, so a lot of basketball players, there's a couple things. One is just don't limit the loads on the bar relative to 1 rep max and do more with less. Doing more with less might mean it could be 5 seconds up, 5 second down tempos. It could be single leg work. It could be sets of 10 or above, like a 1x20. And that's what Dan John, when he was on my podcast, said, if you're not built to squat, don't do basically less than 10 reps. And what that really means from a pressure perspective, and I've had this conversation with Angus Bradley, is 1x20 or anything above 10 reps is good for a narrow infrasternal angle or an elastic athlete, because you're not going to reach that point of the internal pressures won't get so great that it makes you do a negative shape change. Basically, you can manage it in a way that fits with being elastic. As soon as the load gets too high, you kind of get in this point where you have to change your shape a little bit to deal with that load. I think that also is negative too, because I think that can take an elastic athlete into a threat response that's high, meaning like if I'm an elastic and narrow infrasternal angle and I go too heavy, not only could I have that negative shape change, but also my nervous system, my brain doesn't like it. It will downregulate power and output. So those are some general guidelines to think of. And so you could make that up with plyometrics. If you're playing basketball is plyometric too. It's almost one of the more important plyometrics that we don't think of. And so some athletes could do more probably outside the game. Some could do less. And the last thing I'll say is, even for me, I'll tell you a tale of myself with 2 years. My junior year of high school, age 17, I was doing a program called The Science of Jumping, So plyometrics and depth jumps and all that stuff once a week, and doing like deadlifts and some things that fit my profile, I think, well. And the science of jumping program actually was 4 sets of 8 deadlifts. So it wasn't even like you weren't even really getting a lot of power out of those deadlifts. But that was kind of by design in looking back, because I got great results when I was doing 4x8. And I think that's because, again, the load wasn't so heavy that I was creating the negative shape change. And then the plyometrics took care of all the power and neural stuff. So, but that being said, that year was very up and down. Like it wasn't a very consistent year. Like I'd be just jumping out of the gym one week and then I'd be down, and then once I got in season, I lost my vertical. Slowly the vertical kind of went down a little bit to the point where it wasn't consistent. The next year, my senior year, yes, but you realize I had a year of maturation under my belt. I was an older athlete. That year in the fall, I didn't do any plyometrics, not any, but not a lot of plyometrics that year. That year in the fall, I took a strength and conditioning class, which I had been avoiding because I didn't want to do the school's strength program, but I just did it. Part of that was maybe my ego getting over it. My friends were doing it. I needed a credit. I'll take it. So there I was doing deep squats, and we did like the Husker strength program. So we started sets of 10 for a few weeks, then sets of 8, then sets of 5. And the crazy thing was in those sets of 10 and 8, actually, that's when my 2-leg vertical was just taking off, just exploding. And the sets of 5 actually didn't really help it that much. And I think that's where I was starting to reach that point where of starting to grind on the squats. They weren't like as effortless anymore. And that's when the vertical started to stagnate too. And that's this trap we get into where, oh, got to lift more. And then you start grinding and the squat isn't effortless or fluid as much. And that's actually where it's that you're just not going to get helped so much. And that's where like we have this paradigm of just max intent, lift harder, lift faster. Yeah, I think it can help a little bit, especially if you're a wide ISA, but that's not where you should be getting your power production from the core of it. The core of it's some playing and maybe some plyometric supplementation. And so anyways, that year for 2 months, I was lifting heavy-ish, sets of 10, then sets of 8, then sets of 5, doing a lot of like Olympic lift stuff, which that actually was interesting because I feel like that didn't even help. We were doing hang cleans, and I just think that movement, unless you're integrating the feet really well and know what you're doing and have a high bar velocity, I actually don't think it's that helpful. It can be, but my 1 foot vertical was going down. So it was like that was going down, 2 foot was going up, and then I took a 1 to 2 week break from the squatting, and my 1 foot just roared back, and it was as good as it had ever been without really doing plyometrics. This was just playing and dunking and having fun. And then I maintained my jump really well that whole season without really doing plyometrics. So it was kind of a thing where, again, basketball is like the ultimate plyometric. The depth jumps and that stuff is kind of like do it every so often, like, blocks every so often to kind of supercharge things, to downregulate the inhibition of the nervous system, like the Golgi tendon organs, those little things on the tendon junctions that downregulate power. There's a lot of stuff that plyometrics can overload, but I don't view it as the long-term solution. Playing the sport is the long-term solution. Trying to challenge yourself with, more challenging dunks if you're into jumping higher is the long-term solution. So anyways, that season was, way more consistent. That track season following was way more consistent. So I needed that strength, but to me, the best strength was in 1x10. And I'll finish with this, is during the season, my dad got me all these like old track and field VHS tapes with like these old school, like 1990s, like track training. And one of the exercises for high jump was just barbell step ups. And so like in my basement, I had like a makeshift squat rack, and I had like a cinder block. It was a 20 centimeter high cinder block, and then I put like another like little like 4 centimeter, maybe 5 centimeter block on top of it, and I was loading like 200, 300 pounds or 80 to 130 kilos up and doing sets of 10 step ups, not heavy, sets of 10, sets of 12, and my vertical was just so good just by doing that. Like everything was so good, and it was in going heavier that never really helped me that much. It was always, for me, the sweet spot with weights was always a little bit higher reps. And when I was in it, I never saw that. But looking back from afterwards, it was like, it was the higher reps that really just seemed to be good. And then I did notice that in training like more elastic athletes in track and field and stuff like that. it was not the grinding heavier reps actually weren't that helpful. It was lift with a little bit higher reps for those people, and then get your explosiveness out of the speed work and the sprinting and the playing and the plyos and all that stuff. That seems to be a pretty good recipe. If you want to have sprinkle in some bouts of like a little bit heavier stuff, I think that's fine. Some series of where you're maybe doing like easy strength and stuff like that. I think that's fine. 2 sets of 5. And then a little bit, maybe you could throw a bar speed monitor, but I would just do that for light Olympic lifts. I don't think you need to do it for the main lifts because you're going to encourage like anterior tilt to drive the bar type strategies. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. It's subtle, but I think it is substantial.
Cool. So there's this question is from one of my coaches, one of my friend, and he was like training a pro basketball team. And he want to ask, like, when you train jump, like there's like different kind of jump, like counter movement jump, squat jump, and single leg jump, or like double leg jump, single leg broad jump, and double leg broad jump. Do you like train those type, like each different jump like separately, or like, I don't know, or
Sure.
You just train one? Sorry.
I don't think, to me, I wouldn't train a basketball team saying we're going to train single leg jumps today, we're going to train double leg jumps today, in the sense of I wouldn't, especially at the pro level, those motor patterns are so ingrained. I'm not going to take LeBron James and make him like a real good 2-foot jumper. That's not his strategy. Like, he wouldn't even use it. You know what I'm saying? Like, he's just built how he is, and he's going to perform in that. And a lot of how we jump and prefer to jump and use it in a strategy is based off of our build, our structure. And we've learned to play that way for so long. So what I would prefer more like is kind of like take things down to more rudimentary levels. So for example, just being good at like low squat, foot jumps, like where you're hopping in a low position. Some of the Darian Bars stuff where you're doing like forward moving bunny hops, and just learning to yield. Can you yield in a low position? Can you be stiff in a low position? But even that, like I wouldn't want to get to the point where those athletes where they felt like they were really bad at something. Like you don't want to take athletes and just be like, oh man, like you're a pro athlete, and be like, I'm the trainer, and being like, oh yeah, your 2-foot jump is really bad, or your 1-foot jump is really bad, and doing drills that they struggle with. A lot of times the player might just check out. And so I think that finding things that could maybe balance them, but appropriate, I think is fine. I just don't think it's something to overly stress over. I think just in the course of doing different plyometrics and just being fluid and just having good movement tendencies, I think that's fine. I don't think that coaches would really need to dig farther in that, because I think we look at how complex the brain is in putting together movement, and I just think we're competing against something that's so well established, it's not really needed.
So you're not like, let's say if I'm gonna train I'm gonna train a player to jump if I want him to jump higher. So does that mean like you're not really gonna train it separately, but you're gonna you're gonna touch each of those things, right?
Well, like, okay, for example, maybe what I would do would be, okay, I do like maximal outputs, right? Like, so having a vertec or a measurement tool, so an athlete, and maybe we do some testing or something like that, and we do just see how does the player prefer to jump for the test. Maybe we do 1 or 2 feet. What I would be more likely to do is not actually train the technique with the players. At that level, I wouldn't train technique at all, because that's not what they're worried about. Probably they're worried about putting the ball in the basket, playing defense, doing teamwork. That's the important things for them. Yeah. It's not jump technique. Jump technique probably matters if I'm a younger player and I'm really obsessed with jumping higher. Yeah. And even then, there's a lot of technique that could actually create a false ceiling for yourself, because, and this is another topic, but when we overdo positions, or even things like get a long penultimate step, we are going more towards an ideal rather than working with what the body has to offer. And I'll say for something even as simple as like bounding as an example, if I teach an athlete how to bound and I say, well, the objective of bounding is to go and lift your knee to this parallel position, what happens is the athlete will, and I always look at what happens on the ground. What happens on the ground is that's where it all happens. How does the foot relate to the ground? How does the body absorb the ground? And then how does the body work when the ground gives back to you? And when I'm trying to hit a position like a knee height, I will completely ignore what's happening at the ground, the timing of the ground, that spring off the ground. And I'll hit the position and make the coach happy. But the question is did my outputs get better? And I'll talk with people, for example, Mike Kozak, who a friend and colleague of mine up in Columbus, about an hour, 2 hours from here, will get volleyball players who have been instructed to have that long penultimate step, but are screwing it up because they aren't operating on the ground right. They're not dropping their shin correctly. They're going too high into that, if that makes sense. So they actually have to get fixed because of this early coaching that has taken away from them. So what I would do is I would look at, okay, go do your 2-foot jump, go do your 1-leg jump, just jump some ways that you like to do it. And I would watch them jump and I would watch them land. And I would just notice, is there anything from a physical perspective that's holding you back? Meaning, how well are you pronating? How well can you internally rotate to load up and to spend time on the ground to get up? Because if you don't pronate much, you're really like supinated, you're really externally rotated in your tibias and femurs, then you're not wired to spend a lot of time on the ground. It's just how it is. So if they were to desire a better standing vertical or a better 2-foot vertical, and I noticed they're in that alignment, well, what we need to do is maybe get you in a single leg step up and work on keeping your foot on the tripod while your tibia and femur internally rotate a little bit to create time. That's probably what's holding you back. Or let's look at the way the front leg is operating. Like be it a single leg jump or the last step in a 2-foot jump, can the ribs move? How can you rotate? How well do you rotate in the transverse plane? How well can you internally rotate the foot? How well can even the foot work? How well does the rear foot and the forefoot, operate? All those things could hold someone back from, you could tell them to do something like keep that leg straighter or something till you're blue in the face, but they won't do it because they're missing something biomechanically. They're missing something from just basic single leg operation. And I've really been learning that the last year a lot as I've gotten in the private sector and I've been able to work with a lot more people in person, one-on-one, who just want to jump higher and they have like these biomechanical abnormalities. And you learn that it's really all about the foot first and joints and basic single leg movements and seeing what's happening there first. And then, then helping them to work that into their technique. And so with an established player, to me, I would probably just go with like, how are you in a single leg squat? Where's the force going? Do you have a tripod? What's your foot doing? Just managing how they do that, maybe giving them a little bit of what they don't have. And then, hey, let's notice, did that help your jump higher? Oh, cool, it did. Maybe it didn't. You're not using it. I would start there with that level of play. I wouldn't really get into the actual technique of it.
Sure, thanks. So I'm gonna ask, like, I heard a lot of podcasts you did with Darren Barr, and he talks about falling, and which is like not. I mean, what he said is like, if he's gonna start from a block, start from a block, and he said he was gonna use falling instead of like triple extension, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, kind of your thoughts about like push off, and falling.
Sure. So, it's kind of basically do joints. Let's start from the point of, do joints need to relax and allow movement, or do joints need to stiffen up and resist movement? That's really human movement in a nutshell. The only time where you would really push or exert like force would be that first step out of a block situation. But also you have to realize that the first step, the first motion sets up the precedent for the rest of the movement. So it would be really hard to like really push hard and then go into falling the rest of the way. So what I'll say is like Adarian's, one of his big things and the things that's really helped me, and this is the thing, is if you look at the industry in general and human performance, it tends to fall into this conscious mind, volitional, create force type of situation. But that's the problem is that doesn't fit with free energy return. It doesn't fit with how human beings absorb energy and use the twisting and spiraling of the body to release it. And so movement is not just muscles pushing, it's very much the body working with gravity to absorb force and then using levers to release it correctly. So, I mean, I wouldn't say that there shouldn't be any push out of the blocks per se, but at the same time, you have to let your shins drop, for example, to accelerate. And letting the shins drop is letting movement happen. It's not pushing, it's letting movement happen. So it's like, it really is almost a block start or a sprint start would be let movement happen briefly, and then that's where you let the body will then push itself. So when you let movement happen, the brain jumps in and says, hey, I'll save you. I got this, and that's where, again, if we look at the barometer of strength and conditioning to just how the body works, strength and conditioning wants to say, let's more force, let's push harder. And the body's like, no, I got this taken care of. I have, eons of development and I know how to do this. And so a lot of training is just letting the body do it. And by almost having awareness of falling. Darian talks about falling faster too, but you can fall too fast. Like if I just tried to just threw my knees down as fast as I possibly could, it might not work out that well. It's kind of experimenting with and having awareness with how am I falling and feeling the brain save you. Feel the brain get you out of it. And Darian calls that crashing the plane, where you're feeling the body take care of it. What I tend to find works best with acceleration, this for me personally, but I feel like for a lot of people, is just awareness. So just when you put intention in a body part, so let's say your feet, your glutes, whatever, that's where you tend to pick up more tuning. You have more fine-tuned feedback in that body part. And so for me, if I'm accelerating, I'll usually draw my attention to my feet for the first 10 meters. And that tends to be the most effective for me to accelerate well, is I'm not thinking about pushing. All I'm thinking about is what is happening with my feet. And Helen Halk calls that the gift of notice. And so just with that gift of notice, your body will tend to do the job for you and put it together with what you have to offer. So, not to say that there isn't those points where the body does push a little bit. I think that happens in the first step off, but that's not something that I think you even really need to think about. I think the body will take care of it. And as soon as you think I'm pushing, you're just creating a paradigm where you're not really going to fall as much. You're not going to let the body take care of it as much.
Yeah. Good. Thanks. And I'm going to jump into the next one would be, if it's for one session, like I kind of want to ask the ratio between strength, speed, power, and movement. Like how much will you be like, is it like 40% of the movement, then like speed and strength would be like 10 or 20? Or like, what is the ratio for you?
Like when I construct a training program?
Yeah.
Sure. So like I'll just say like an average training program for me, when athletes would come in, it's either just try, like, it depends on the week. Like, usually a day will have a theme. So a day will be a speed and movement day, or it might be a strength day, or it might be a tempo running and speed endurance type day. So it just depends on the theme. But like throughout the flow of the week, I like working in threes. I like Nikola Tesla, the numbers of creation, 3, 6, and 9. I think there's something about having 3 unique styles of training or days or emphases. And so I will tend to have, not for everybody, but I tend to have a day that's like power output. So like acceleration, maybe some bounding, those types of things. Maybe Olympic lifts. So this like power type focus, this neural magnitude type focus. And so that's like one of the days. And in that days can be plenty of movement. If we're working acceleration, we might be working like some Adarian bar, like falling hops, where you're in a low position, you're falling, learning to fall. And I like the drills because the drills to me create awareness. This isn't the actual skill, but I'm just getting awareness of what is it like to let my shins drop forward? How are my feet coming with? And those kind of things. Or maybe I'm doing bounding that day and I'm just feeling, how's my timing? How's my fluidity? At what point is the ground giving back and how am I going with it? So that, like the power day, you can have a lot of things in there. There's tons of combos. The strength day, a lot of times that is more isometric in nature. So a lot of like, we will do a 3-4 minute iso lunge to warm up, 3 minutes of iso push up, 53-way hip circles, then squatting or squatted stuff, we'll say. So like squatted cleans, squat catch cleans, squat, like some sort of squat variation, single leg squat variation. You can do like your bench pressing in there, those kind of things. That's more that strength day. And again, that's regulated by, are you a 1x10 person, a 1x15 person? Are you a heavier? Can you go heavier? You could do partial squats that type of day. Like for me personally, this is actually crazy. Because like for me, if I don't lift weights at all, this happened in the pandemic last year when it first came out and all the gyms were closed. I went from about 187 pounds, or what is that in kilos? Like 83 kilos down to 169, or what is that? Maybe basically I lost 17 pounds,
Okay.
or what is that kilos? 8 kilos, something like that, just from not lifting. Like, so if I don't lift, I've heard it, like you can only gain so much muscle, and I've had to work so hard to get the muscle I have, and I lost it all. And honestly, I'm back up to about 180 pounds, and that has been maintained with literally probably only about 5 minutes of barbell training a week. That's it.
5 minutes?
Yeah, 5 total minutes. That's it. The rest of it is isometrics, body weight isometric training, sprinting, jumping, tempo sprinting, playing around with crawling, that kind of stuff. Barely any, like if you total all the time I spent working with a barbell, it's about that. It's not a lot. You don't need a lot. And so, yeah, those strength days can just totally be modulated based off of need. And if I was playing basketball right now, I wouldn't do any more strength training barbell than what I'm doing now. I just think it's fine. So then the other day is more of like a rhythm. I would call it a rhythm day, like a speed rhythm day. Now this is exclusive to, I think, people who want to run faster. There could be, and honestly, if I was a basketball player, I would just play basketball this day. Like, but for me, because I'm not playing basketball right now, well, in the past, I'd play racquetball, but to me, it's just tempo sprints, and I'll explore different ways to run. Maybe I'll do some one-arm running. I'll do some low knee running. I'll do some squatted running. I'll mix that up. I'll throw some isometrics in there. I posted a workout last week where it was like hold 2 minutes, then hold 2 minute lunge, hold 2 minute push up, go do a 200, and then kind of keep doing that. Like you could do something like that. So those are like the 3 main days of sorts, and all sorts of variations within that I'll do. Yeah, so a lot of people have lift more than I do. A lot of my clients, I won't have them lift 5 minutes. I'll have them lift more than that. Just for me, the place that I spent so many years kind of screwing my body up with too heavy a lifting, I need to spend some time without it to get that all back. And every day, every week, I literally just feel more connected and like my old self in high school, if that makes sense. I needed time just to get away from it all.
I feel that.
So it's about a third. It's about a third power. It's about a third strength, and it's about a third just like speed endurance with like rhythmic. But that could be a game too. So
Okay. I heard, and the next thing I heard it from like the podcast you did with Coach Boo Schexnayder. He said that if he's gonna train basketball in season, he's gonna let his player do like max plyometric every 14 to 17 days.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I want to like program this into like if I'm training a team, if I want to program this into in the program, and
do you think I'm gonna need like more strength, or I just let them do like max plow every 17 days?
Yeah, that's one of those things, like, I believe him for sure, but that's what I still have enough experience on personally to like really make a comment, in the sense that my safety mechanism has always been microdosing, right? Like, that's the thing, is be safe, just microdose it out. Like, you could do a few, but I don't know, it does make sense to me. I mean, it makes sense. I just haven't messed with it enough. So, and I would trust Boo with that stuff. So I'm sure you
Yeah,
can do it.
yeah. And also I heard it from the other track guy. He said like if it only for him, if it's like in season, he's gonna like run a lot, and he's not gonna do any like strength training. He's gonna do like powerlifting, like Olympic lifting, and some plyo, but not really strength training.
I think that just fits with the type of player, though. Like, yeah, you're like, your power forward, who's like the roughhouser, would probably rather have a heavier squat, right? Like, versus a point guard or a shooting guard might like a faster clean or a Kaiser jump. You know what I'm saying? Like, and that's just where the
Yeah,
menu
yeah,
system comes through. It's not about the
yeah,
coach. It's about, hopefully, as a coach, and think about this: have I done my job by, in the off season, exposing players to enough different things that they're like, oh, I like that, coach, can I do that? That makes me feel good. And then in season, they get to do what makes them feel good. Like, that's at the end of the day, that's what it is. It's I don't think it's this method or that method exactly. It's more like
okay,
buckets. It's like, all right, here's your strength piece. Hey, what do you not completely, there needs to be some structure, but I mean, as I found in working with athletes, 9 times out of 10, when an athlete wants to do something that's not ego driven, and I can get to that, it's usually the right thing. And what I mean is, usually athletes who've had exposure to heavy lifting early, they maybe have had a success for a window, but that caps you out. And then they're just like, I got to do better. I got to do more. I saw it with swimmers a lot.
yeah,
Like, you
yeah,
got
yeah,
to lift more. And I'm just like, look, like, you already like basically hit the point of diminishing returns here. Like, killing yourself to lift more weight is not going to help you. And so that's the only point where I think it doesn't. But as long as it's within an appropriate percentage, like, you can't go above 85% or something. Yeah, have fun. Pick what you want. Like, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. And I think the backbone too in that is like isometric type stuff, health and just balance and that type of thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Thanks. And finally, can you tell everybody about your books and the podcast, and if there's anyone who wants to find you, where can they find you?
Yeah. So, with the books, so I've written the books, Vertical Foundations. That was like 6 years ago. A decent book. I think it needs to be updated, but it's not expensive. So if you want to buy it, I think it's all
Yeah.
right. Speed Strength is my book on all things speed training. There's a ton of power stuff in there too, like we've kind of talked about. I'm very proud of that book, but it's more linear speed, but it's pretty good. A lot of Adarian bar stuff in there, and so those are like the main two. I have a jump program called Vertical Ignition, which in my opinion is too complicated. But if you're just curious, it's only $25. Someone asked about a book called my foot book coming out, and I took a pause on that for about a year, just because I basically have the book written, but there's just some things I wanted to keep working with in person, so that just to continue to bridge the gap between theory and what actually happens. Just because I think the foot is so complicated, it's very easy to get bogged down in the theory. Oh, you got 26 bones and 33 joints and a forefoot and a rear foot and this and that. But it's like, well, okay, well, what do you need to focus on? Like, how do we get the bridge to happen? Because a lot of people with messed up feet, it's a long road to having good, like, the hyper arch foot that Chong talks about, and forefoot rear. It's not like it's more complex than just, I think, what we might think it is. And so just spending extra time to finish that, I've needed it, and I'm just about ready to go through that final process. But the interim project has been an online course called Elastic Essentials, which is essentially my best take on how do we train the human body for sport in a manner that fits with free energy return, that fits with how we're supposed to move, and how do we pack strength on top of that. And so I think that it's really important for injury prevention and then longevity. And so that course details basically the foot. How do I do body weight training? How do I approach plyometrics? How do I approach speed? Not in super Adarian bar detail speed, but more like the rhythmic stuff. And then how do I approach strength, all from that perspective. So it's going to be pretty massive. We already filmed about a third of it, so I'm excited to get that one out. And then the foot book will be finished. So That's what I'm up to. Now, you can find me on this Instagram or justflysports.com or the Just Fly Performance Podcast.
Okay. Thank you for your time, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Eric. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So maybe next time we can do a second one.
All right. Yeah, just let me know.
Okay, thanks. See you.
All right. Bye.
So that's all for today. Thanks.